If you've made it this far in the course, congratulations. Give yourself a pat on the back. You've learned HTML, CSS, you've learned how to create your own responsive grids so you can create any layout you can imagine. You've learned the basics of Sass, and you've even learned about cross-browser and device compatibility. Now this is where the course ends, but I don't want to leave you hanging. I want to give you some ideas on where to go next. So in terms of next steps, I have 3 main pieces of advice. Number 1, follow your curiosity. Number 2, get to know yourself and then specialize. And number 3, join a community. So let's discuss these 3 points in further detail. So number 1, follow your curiosity. Now, throughout the course, you will recall that most lessons end with me telling you to experiment and have fun. By constantly experimenting, you will naturally push your own boundaries and limits and find holes in your knowledge. Part of being a web developer is learning how to learn. You need to be thirsty to keep learning. So if you're trying to create a certain layout or a certain style or a certain effect or a certain user interface and you're not sure how to do it, search and seek out the answers. Follow your curiosity. It's okay to not know everything. Web browsers and devices are evolving so rapidly that if you don't humble yourself and ask questions on message boards or ask your buddies for advice, you will quickly fall behind. So whenever you see something interesting on a website and you're not sure how to create it yourself, follow that curiosity. Research the topic, see what you can find. Now, I don't mean to put words in your mouth or thoughts in your mind, but I will make an educated guess that one of the first things that your curiosity will lead you towards is JavaScript. I will talk a bit more about JavaScript towards the end of my second piece of advice. But first, let's talk about the basics of getting to know yourself and then specializing. Essentially, you want to focus your energy on building up a skill set that matches your own natural set of strengths, or that matches the things that you are really interested in. So for example, if you could choose between the 2 following roles, which would you choose? Would you rather spend most of your time designing artwork and user interfaces and button styles and dreaming at night about color and texture and balance and typography and impact and hierarchy and motion and rhythm? Well, you get the idea. Role number 1 has a focus on graphic design. Or would you choose role number 2? Role number 2 is more focused on the technology at play. So for example, when we were using Sass, if the thought of creating your own mix-ins or using complex mix-in libraries excited you, you might be a great fit for role number 2. Or in other words, you might be interested in actual programming. So here's another quick example. If we think back to the HTML portion of the course and focus our memories on the forms portion, where we learned how to create interactive forms where users can input data and then click a submit button, role number 2, or the role of the programmer, is responsible for making something actually happen. So when the web browser submits that form data, it would be your job to receive that data and save it into a database, or to send it out as an email to someone, or to complete any other potentially useful task. That's role number 2 in a nutshell. So here are the next steps. If you chose role number 1, you can simply continue to grow as a graphic designer. Read books on the elements of graphic design, build up a portfolio of artwork, focus most of your technical energy on CSS and Sass, and you will be well on your way to a career as a designer. If you chose role number 2, you can continue down the path of becoming a programmer. The next step would be picking one of 2 languages, either Ruby or PHP, and becoming obsessed with one of those languages and learning as much as you possibly can. Now, it's important to point out that not everyone with a successful career is either role number 1 or role number 2. You can be a mixture of both. These are just the 2 most common archetypes when we think of web design and development. Your own unique set of strengths and interests will determine your own unique blend or mix of the 2 roles. There are rare, incredibly talented people that excel in both positions. I'm certainly not one of them, and I don't know too many people that are. But those people are out there, and you might be one of them. The main idea is to discover what truly interests you and pursue it. Now, before we move on to the third piece of advice, which is join a community, I want to circle back to JavaScript while we're still discussing the idea of specializing. Now, whether you chose role number 1 or role number 2, A safe next step is to begin learning JavaScript. I won't do JavaScript the disservice of trying to summarize what it's used for in 20 seconds, but I will say that JavaScript is the third part of the magical trio that creates everything that is possible within the web browser. Now, you've already learned two parts of that trio. You've learned HTML, you've learned CSS. JavaScript is the glue that's missing. JavaScript is what can begin to make our pages feel like applications. JavaScript adds behavior to our pages, and JavaScript can greatly enhance user experiences. And in recent years, we've seen a tremendous rise in JavaScript being used for tasks that don't even take place directly in the web browser. Or in other words, we've seen JavaScript be used for servers and legitimate back-end functionality. So again, whether you chose role number 1 or role number 2, JavaScript is the next logical step for a language that you should get your feet wet with. Now, in the description or notes section for this lesson, I will include info on free excellent ways to get started with JavaScript. But for the time being, let's focus on the third piece of advice, which is to join a community. Joining a community is important because even if you are the best designer or the best programmer in the world, if you lack a network of people in the industry, or if you're not connected to anyone that appreciates those skills, it can be very challenging to put your skill set to use. I recommend you spend a bit of time with Google researching each of the following 5 projects or communities. Publishing tools such as WordPress and Drupal, frameworks such as Ruby on Rails, Symfony, and CodeIgniter. So perform a bit of research on those 5 communities and see if any of them spark your interest more than the others. I will give you a hint that WordPress is likely the most accessible or easy to get into, and Ruby on Rails is probably the best choice if you're feeling ambitious. Regardless of which community you choose to become a part of, it obviously doesn't even need to be one of the 5 that I've listed. The key is that you are surrounding yourself with other talented, creative people that value your design and/or coding skills. So stay hungry, stay curious, always be learning new things, and in time you will be swimming in opportunities. For the final time in this course, I will say that will bring this lesson to a close. Thank you so much for coming along on the journey. I hope you're excited about the new skills that you've learned and how you plan on using them, and I will see you around. Thanks. Bye.